Please welcome President and Chief Operating Officer at the Milken Institute, Richard Ditizio.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for coming. My voice is almost shot, but I would not miss the opportunity to come to this session. So the Institute does programming for women and on gender-related issues all around the world. In each of the places in which we hold a conference or a summit. So we've done women's programming in Abu Dhabi, in Singapore, in London, in Washington, and of course here each year at the Global Conference. One of the things that I heard today that was a little shocking and upsetting to me was this afternoon at lunch when Jane Harman was on the stage and noted that, well, she couldn't go to Dartmouth because there weren't any women. And I think it was just such a part of the vernacular, and everybody just kind of glossed over it, that was just, well, that's the way it worked. And I think that you tend to get what you tolerate, and we have been very much in an activist mode of late here at the Institute around gender parity and gender equality, and have made it a principal tenet of this year's conference. So hopefully you've noted that we've had a number of sessions that relate to this issue, looking at workplace parity, pay parity, understanding the Time's Up movement from a different perspective, and looking at this issue from a multifaceted lens. And we have an entire equality track, which we will then continue to do in each of the areas in which we hold our conferences. So to that end, I just left a private session where we were talking about what are the tactics we can take specifically, actionable items to make this issue real inside the corporations in which we all live, work, and the communities in which we live. So we are going to launch today, hashtag MI Equality Pledge. Danielle, thank you got that right. Hashtag MI Equality Pledge. And what we want you to do is you can't address an issue unless you're transparent about it. Of the Fortune 500 companies, 400 release no data on what they're doing regarding gender and pay equity. Laws often, or policies inside organizations often restrict people from even speaking about their salaries, which lends that veil of secrecy. So how are we supposed to know how we're doing on gender unless we talk about it? So I want to task every person in this room, every person who's listening to me, to go back into your organization and promote this notion that we want transparency around data about gender pay equality. And then we at the Institute will aggregate that data and present it back to all of you next year at the Global Conference. So the goal is we only have about 20% of companies in the Fortune 500 reporting those statistics today. We like to try and get it to 100, but as close as we can for next year, and we're going to make the people who are the outliers want to join as opposed to the people who are joining trying to be the outliers. So I started with something Jane said that was a bit distressing. I want to say something that came up in the last presidential campaign that Hillary Clinton said, and it gives me a lot of hope. And what she said was, my mother was born before women had the right to vote, and my daughter just voted for her mother to be president of the United States. So there's a lot of hope and optimism around this issue, and we are going to be at the forefront of it. And I want to bring out today's panel talking about building meaningful lives with women at the forefront, and these women certainly are. So please welcome to the stage Emily Chang, Jane Goodall, Goldie Hawn, and Sheila Marcelo.
Thank you.
So first of all, I am just incredibly honored to be on stage with three incredible pioneers in such different industries around the world. And I know, obviously, by the sound of the applause, everyone is really excited and honored to be here with all of you. So these women need no introduction, but I will make short ones. We're joined by Jane Goodall, founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, leading scientist, conservationist, barrier breaker. Goldie Hawn, founder of the Hawn Foundation. Sorry, is that my earring? Yeah. Hawn Foundation, and one of the most beloved actresses in the world.
Oh, thank you.
And Sheila Marcelo, founder, chair, and CEO of Care.com, which gives millions of families the freedom and flexibility to find meaning in their own lives. So I'd like to start with this word meaning and how you have defined living a meaningful life. Is it a successful career? Is it leaving a legacy? Is it finding that elusive work-life balance? Is it have to do with family? Goldie, I'll start with you.
I thought a lot about that in terms of meaning because it changes with time. If you'd asked me the question when I was 22, it might have been different. But now that I am at the ripe old age that I am, I would say that what gives me meaning really is to look back at the sum total of the decisions that I have made in the name of goodwill, parenting, and having a very stable and beautiful family. But meaning is something that's so deep inside of us that it is a question of, we talked about this earlier, but who am I and what do I care about? What matters to me? And how am I going to step out and make that happen? And I think that's really where we have to look at meaning in our lives. What have we given back? Whether it's to our family, to our animals, to the people that we love. That gives me meaning.
Sheila?
I think building on what Goldie just mentioned, I do think it's the what and the how, but I also think it's the who in our lives. Certainly my parents, I was born and raised in the Philippines. I came here for college and I got pregnant in college, but my parents really instilled with me a sense of values. I remember when I was in 5th grade, I'd forgotten the language in Tagalog, and they sent me to a provincial school way in the province of the Philippines. And I had to go learn the language all over again. But I also was a very poor school, and we had to clean the classroom as all students, and then we used the coconut husk to actually clean floors. And today I can proudly say I'm really great at cleaning floors. But my parents really instilled the values of, and coconuts always stayed within my life on how important that is. And so who matters? It's mentors in our lives. It's people like my friend Francine who give me inspiration. She's doing this beautiful nonprofit called Same Sky that is actually helping women in Rwanda create beautiful jewelry, which I'm wearing, and also in Jersey City, where it's 0% recidivism of ex-offenders making beautiful jewelry. So these are the kinds of people who inspire me because they're really creating meaning for me, not just in helping others. And I think the who matters, the what matters, the purpose-driven life, but I also think, and how, as Goldie pointed out, how are you going to live that life?
Perfect.
Jane?
Well, what gives me meaning? I think for me, it's trying to live each day as though it's the last. And at the end of the day, being able to say, did I make a difference? Was my life this day useful to anybody other than myself? And I get a lot of meaning too from being out in nature. I think we all need to be out in the green places. For me, looking back over my life, it's knowing that what I've been doing has impacted other people, and I say that because they tell me almost every day. And just at this conference, people I've never met before have come up and said, I read your book when I was 10, that's why I'm doing what I do now. There's one man who came up, he said, I was 10 years old in India, and I read your book. And thank you, because I wouldn't have done what I've done if I hadn't read your book. So it has to give your life meaning. If you know you've had an impact on other people. And I think I'll talk about our youth program later, but that for me, knowing you've helped somebody through a time of difficulty, knowing that you've helped animals. For example, one of the things that shocked me deeply, deeply, deeply was when I discovered that our chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, were being used in medical research because their bodies are so like us by scientists who refused to believe the equally behavioral and psychological similarities. They were being kept in 5-foot by 5-foot cages, taken from their mothers when they were little tiny babies, put in little things that looked like microwave ovens, and I couldn't sleep for nights. And so I knew I had to try and do something about it. It's taken a very long time, but now National Institutes of Health, thanks to Francis Collins, has released all its chimps, 400 of them, from medical.
Oh my God.
I think a lot of the people in this room are probably familiar with the work that has made all of you famous. I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now and sort of the latest incarnation of how you are finding meaning. You mentioned the youth organization in Goldie. You have the Hawn Foundation and Mind Up. So just so that we all know, talk to us about this work that you are doing now and what you hope to give back.
So part of transitioning in life is wondering what you're going to be doing, and are you going to do the same thing all your life? And especially as an actress, you really don't always get the great parts as you get older. And I really was someone who never wanted to wait for the phone to ring, and I really cared about a lot of other things. And at 9/11, I really saw that the world had changed forever, and I wanted to help the children who were going to be living in this uncertainty. And with all the things that I had learned about the brain and understanding psychology, positive psychology, love for children, and really being a longtime meditator, and knowing what the research showed, I said, why are we keeping all this in a petri dish? We have to give it to our children in schools in order to build greater leadership, healthier people, less reactive people, great positive critical thinkers and problem solvers. And so in order to do so, I created a program called Mind Up, and that was 15 years ago. And I brought in neuroscientists, positive psychologists. I brought in meditators, mindfulness experts, and teachers. And we put a program together. I had it researched immediately because I didn't want to go out until I knew it worked. And it was extraordinarily positive research on the shift and changes that these children's brains and behavior and state of mind happened. It was thrilling. That's 15 years ago. We're now trying to measure how many children have it because we don't have the exact numbers because you can actually buy it at Scholastic. And we train over 200,000 teachers. When you multiply that, you get 6 million children. But it's pretty exciting. I thank you. And it's the kind of, I would say, the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, I've made a lot of funny movies and produced, and we'll talk about that and how hard that was. But when you really have an idea and you say, I'm going for it, and people say to you, you'll never do it. And I kind of know, what that's like, which is there's a lot of people that say, you're never going to get 400 of these chimpanzees. But you stayed the course. And I think staying the course with the belief in change and what needs to happen for the greater good is called tenacity. And I said, watch me. And so all these years later, it's incredible the shift and changes that are happening.
And it's interesting that you started that before sort of the smartphone explosion, and I'm curious how your work has evolved as we've become more tech obsessed and children have become more tech addicted.
Yeah, it's actually a hindrance. There was a study that was done in regard to that where children, the control group had to put their phones outside and take a test, and then the other ones were able to keep their phone by their test on their desk. And the children that had to keep the phone there at the desk did decidedly worse on this testing than the kids that actually had the phone away because of distraction. And distraction actually steals our intimacy with each other and creates loneliness. And loneliness is it's permeating. There's this isolation that's beginning to happen. And our children are really looking at how many followers they have. They're measuring their self-worth by the wrong standards. So there's a lot that we have to tackle with Mind Up, and we're adding on and growing in terms of understanding our technology and also understanding what it does to our brain. because we do teach brain science, and every emotion, everything has a correlate to neurobiology, and that's in their brain. So we're educating them in a different way so they'll be able to manage themselves as they grow up and live in the workplace and actually become maybe the leaders of the world.
Sheila, as I said earlier, care.com is so much more than just finding a babysitter. In fact, actually, the elder care and dog walking. And, I remember seeing you ring the bell and doing so many things that probably you never thought you would do. And I'm curious about sort of the bigger mission there, beyond just being a public company, beyond making money, which are all very important.
Emily interviewed me actually when we went public 4 years ago. So, Goldie touched on something that really speaks to me, which is passion. Passion, and especially building something, an entrepreneurship. So when I started and founded the company 11 years ago, I remember people telling me, oh my God, you're never going to solve this fragmented issue. It's very difficult to use technology. People aren't going to go online to look for care. And of course, we're 26 million members now. We're in 20 countries, and we're continuing to invest in the company. But something broader spoke to me several years ago. And it was the true mission of why we started care.com. And it was what Brian Stevenson talks about equal justice, which is proximity. What was it that started and seeded the passion that I had to start the company? It was actually a personal experience. I got pregnant in college between my sophomore and junior year. My husband's parents were deceased. My parents lived in the Philippines. I didn't have great care in this country. I didn't know where to go. And then fast forward, when my little child, my second one, who I'm visiting Thursday night, who's now 18, he was born, and I needed to beg my parents to come to the United States to take care of him with me. And my father fell backwards and had a heart attack. And talk about proximity. I was 29 years old, struggling between childcare and senior care. And here I was, working at a technology company using the Yellow Pages. And I was highly educated. I got my JD MBA from Harvard. This was, I've been doing internet startups. And I said, if I'm struggling through this, many millions and billions of families are struggling through this. But now if I fast forward proximity, Ai-Jin Poo, who started the National Domestic Workers Alliance, has taught me something different about proximity. It's not just about the families we represent. It's also the caregivers. On average, caregivers in this country makes $9 an hour. Golf caddies, and I wish there were more men in this room, and yes, women play golf as well, but $17 an hour we pay golf caddies. Okay? Caregivers are paid $9 an hour. Nail salons are actually audited more, than daycare centers. So we've got issues around quality, affordability, accessibility of care, and it's a problem. So we're doing, a lot about it. Systems change, creating social impact organization. We launched the Care Institute with AARP to train caregivers across the country and to create standards. We train refugees called Care Forward in Europe to actually become caregivers. I was raised by Filipina nannies, and I would run into friends who would tell me, I love adobo, I love pancit, and they'd start speaking to me in Tagalog and these languages because they love their nanny for their children. And suddenly I thought this could be a real solution around changing how we think about refugees across the globe, because I really believe care transcends boundaries. I can talk for hours, obviously, about my passion about this industry, but honestly, such an honor to be here. And Jane, love you for everything that you're doing.
So please, Jane, as we were coming on, I told Jane I wanted her to talk about her current passion. She said, oh, there are so many. But, talk about the children and the work that you're doing.
No, I think I have to talk a bit more about something else, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. I want you to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
I can do it very quickly, so don't worry.
Go for it.
I first of all want to acknowledge my own mother, because but for her, I wouldn't be doing what I do. She supported my love of animals when I was a tiny little girl. she didn't freak out when she found I'd taken a whole handful of earth and earthworms to bed with me. She said, I was only 1.5, I don't remember, but you know. So she supported this love. When I was 10 and I read Tarzan of the Apes, I just saved up enough money to buy this little second-hand book, and I fell in love with Tarzan, who, stupid man, married the wrong Jane, didn't he? But so anyway, that started my dream. I will go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. And everybody laughed. How will you do that? Africa's far away. You don't have any money. World War II is raging. And you're just a girl. Girls don't do that sort of thing. But my mother said, if you really want to do this, then you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of opportunity, but never give up. I've taken that message all around the world, particularly to children in, you know, underserved areas. And the number of people who have written to me or said to me, Jane, I want to thank you because you did what you did, taught me I can do what I want to do as well. So that was the beginning of it all. And I did get to Africa, you all know that. And I worked with the chimpanzees. And then I realized that chimpanzees all across Africa, numbers were dropping. Forests were disappearing. And I also saw these chimpanzees in medical research. So I knew I had to do something. So I left the paradise of Gombe National Park and the forest and the chimps, and traveling around Africa to learn more about the chimpanzee problems, because I really think you need first-hand information like your experience. And yes, I learned about the plight of chimps, but I also learned about the plight of so many Africans living in and around chimpanzee habitat. And I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, which had been part of a huge forest, and it was then, in 1990, just a little island surrounded by completely bare hills, overused farmland, and the people were struggling to survive, cutting the last trees down, even on the steep slopes, in their desperation to grow food to feed their families or to get charcoal to make some money. And so I realized at that point, unless we do something to help the people live better lives, then we can't even try to save the chimps. So the Jane Goodall Institute, we started our program, Take Care, or Takari it's called, and it was very holistic. I won't go into it. You can look it up on our janegoodall.org website. But it's very holistic. We didn't go in as a group of arrogant white people telling the people what we were going to do to improve their lives. We had a team of local Tanzanians who went into the villages, sat and talked to the people, and asked them what they thought we could do to help them. And it spread, it grew. We work a lot with microcredit, like Muhammad Yunus, who's one of my heroes, and with groups of women, and they have to choose environmentally sustainable projects. We've had over 90% of the money returned, and then they're proud, isn't it? It's much better than giving money, because now it's their project, and then they can take out a bigger loan if they want. And trying to keep girls in school beyond puberty, which means, first of all, you have to find money for, hygienic latrines. It's all so interconnected. And so we keep girls in school, as many as we can afford to do, because it's shown all around the world that as women's education improves, family size tends to drop. So this program has been so successful. We're now in 7 different African countries in and around chimpanzee habitat, and it's worked. So a lot of effort requires a lot of money to keep it all going. What is the use if we're not educating young generation to do better at caring for the planet than we? And so that's what you asked me to talk about, but I had to lead up to it as to how on earth I got there.
I love the wind-up. I loved it.
So, no, wait, I haven't finished yet, because you wanted me to talk about our program for young people, Roots and Shoots, and all I'll say, again, you can look it up on the website, but it began in Tanzania with 12 high school students worried about everything going on wrong in the world around them. You know, the poaching. Why wasn't the government prosecuting poachers? Why wasn't somebody looking after the street children? Or why were they throwing stones at dogs? Or why was there illegal dynamite fishing, destroying the coral reefs? And so I got these 12 high school students to get all their friends together. The program main message is, Every single one of us matters. Every single one of us makes some kind of impact every day. And if we think about the consequences of even the little choices we make and how that might affect the future, then we begin to move towards a better world. So because of learning about the interconnectedness of everything, each group in the school will choose 3 projects. They choose it. We don't tell them what to do. And we can advise them. Project to help people, project to help animals, a project to help the environment that we are destroying so rapidly. So what began with those 12 high school students and their friends is now in 100 countries with about 150,000 groups, and a group can be a whole school, which in China is an awful lot of kids. And we've got members in preschool and university and everything in between. And yes, we work in refugee camps. We have roots and shoots there, and it's changed their lives, totally changed their lives. We are in some prisons, and even working with old people, places like China where they kind of pushed out when they're 60 or something, and they kind of lose the will to live. But when they can start thinking of what they can do to make the world better, they change.
Thank you for doing that. Now, you have all broken down enormous walls in your respective fields, and I know that wasn't always easy, and especially when people told you you couldn't. And I'm really curious what your thoughts are on the current women's movement, the Me Too and the Time's Up movement. And Goldie, you mentioned you produced. She also produced movies for 30 years and was behind the camera as well. And you really took it upon yourself to do that.
I did.
And so what is it like watching this explode now when you lived it for so long?
It's exciting. It's exciting. It's very exciting to see how things have shifted. But I'll tell you a story. In the 1960s, I was doing Laugh-In. And I was funny, bubble-headed. Everyone thought I was dumb. I danced in a bathing suit. And I was sort of the virtual, quote-unquote, dumb blonde. And I wasn't dumb. I was actually a ballerina. And I was a dancer. And I, suddenly got pulled out of a chorus line, and here I was. But I remember being interviewed by some woman from, Glamour or one of the magazines. And she said to me, and I was like 23, and I'd already been in analysis, which I can share with you a little bit, that I didn't really like the fact that I was pulled out of the chorus line. I was just starting to dance. I was quite happy. But my life changed very dramatically, and I had a dramatic psychological response to it. I really didn't want to go out. I had panic attacks. I didn't know what was going on. So therefore, I was seeing a psychologist. I was doing a lot of self-examination, trying to understand what's going on with my brain and why everybody's so happy for me and I'm not. And this woman comes up to me, and I'm just giving a little bit of that background, and she said to me, well, don't you feel responsible when women are burning their bras now, and there's women's liberation, and this was 1967. I mean, don't you feel bad about who your character is and all of that? And I said, gee, I never thought of that, because I'm really already liberated. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, liberation comes from the inside. It doesn't come from the outside. So how we look at liberation is what we will create if we're brave enough to do it. And we are getting brave and finally saying some of the things that those of us in the movie industry clearly have had experiences. Me as a dancer had some terrible experiences. I was always told I'd never get anywhere, and just the undermining of my character or of my sense of self. But I was a fighter, and nothing was going to stop me because I knew what I wanted. And what happened is that when I made deals at studios of where I had a production company, and I produced movies. And I was one of the first women to actually have a production company that was producing movies for me and for other people in television and theaters, movies. It was not easy. And when I did Private Benjamin, I produced that, and I got on the cover of Newsweek magazine, dumb as a fox. Gee, thanks. It was maybe the double-edged sword of my life, because I became someone in a perception that was hard to work with, that had to have it her way. There were directors that didn't want to take me on because they felt I was too controlling. None of this was true, but it was a perception of what women are like when they're in power. It's scary. So I really did move around it in ways dealing with men because it was run by men. And I also watched women who were getting more jobs in studios and heads of this and heads of that. But the truth of the matter is they were still under the thumb of a man who had the money, who was running the studio. So there wasn't any true liberation there. And when we made films about women, they were always paid less, no matter what. And it was something that we tried to move it up and try to change, but it was very, very difficult. I'll tell you a story. We did a movie. We did a big hit movie, and I won't say what it is, or the studio. But we each lowered our price quite a bit to do the movie. It was a huge hit, and we went back to do number 2. They did not want to give us any more money than what we got in the first place. Not even a bump in salary. Now, we talk about integrity and where we go and how we go forward, and how do we stand up to try to make changes. I think the only way you make a change is through your own truth and your own integrity. And I said I can't do that movie because my integrity won't allow it, or to give any of these women the same amount of money. We created a big movie for you, and if you can't bump us up a little bit, I don't want to do this movie. And I went off and I made a movie that was a quarter of the price. So it wasn't about the money. It was about the attitude. It was about what was expected of us, because they didn't think we had a voice, or we didn't think that we had intention. So that idea is how we make and create change. So I think what's happening today is we're hearing more voices, more women standing up. And it isn't just in Hollywood, of course. It is permeating in all areas of society. I could talk further on this, but I will say one thing that we can talk about it, but the male and female brain are very different. And because I am in this area of brain science and understand it to a point, if we learned more about the male brain and the men learned more about the female brain, and we were together on this, you realize that we are one together powerhouse. We are a great team. And there is education that needs to happen around this. Because if we're going to live together, work together, play together, we have to learn to respect each other. And sometimes you can't just say, respect me. You have to have education and cognitive thinking about why am I like that? Why is a man like that? Then it creates compassion. And once you have an understanding to be compassionate, understanding, and empathetic, because I know you don't understand the way I think because you're a man. But here's the thing, I want you to know what I think like, and I want you to know that that's what separates us, and that's what makes us great. Frankly, I think a man and a woman should be president of the United States. I mean, I think that's a fabulous duo, because we think one way and men think another. And then suddenly you put that together, and if you could actually converse without arguing, I think we can come up with some amazing solutions.
Trump just went crazy on Twitter at that. Sheila, you know,
Let me build on that.
exactly.
So there are definitely systemic problems, and obviously you just wrote a book that I can't wait to read, Brotopia in Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
Right, Emily? And so raised money in Silicon Valley, took it all the way to public. You know, what really surprised me was I always thought that when I pitched it in the A round, the company and the concept, because it was sort of focused on women, that I got that it would be a challenge in venture capital. Because as you raise your A round, you call it sort of a hope and prayer because you haven't proven the business model. And so you kind of need people across the table who relate to the product and relate to the experience. And so you often hear this, that you want more women in the room, especially in venture capital, to support female entrepreneurs, because then they understand the product and they would know how to use it, especially care, which is predominantly a female chief household officer responsibility, right? So fast forward, we're now taking the company public. I had an analyst sit me down on a non-deal roadshow right before we went public, a male one who continues today to cover us, and warned me. He said, it's going to be very difficult. This is from him, 99% of male analysts don't have care issues, right? They may, they might have plants, maybe a pet, but, they're not struggling with kids right now, and often they're young enough that they're not dealing with parental issues. And so it's not going to relate a lot to them. And Sheila, you're going to have to at least have 8 to 10 quarters of straight profitability before your stock picks back up. And he was precisely right. Because the challenge that the data-driven was required because they couldn't understand the overall product. And of course, I've got plenty of stories about this difference between male and female brain. I remember once flying in, we had to go fit in a meeting to go pitch and some male investors, public institutional investors, and I decided to go run to the bathroom. My CTO, my CFO, both men decide to go in first. I go to the bathroom, I follow. I go straight to the coffee pot to pour myself some coffee, and given that I was raised by good parents, I offered coffee to everybody in the room. And then we were shaking hands down the row, and of course, the public institutional investor said, "You must be the assistant from the bank." And I said, "No, I'm actually Sheila Marcelo. I'm founder, CEO, and chairwoman of Care.com, but it's nice to meet you too." And in instances like I have so many stories like that, right? And in instances like this that Goldie pointed out is the compassion around the unconscious bias that was clearly there, context, or whatever the situation of how this person was raised. And I'm often, instead of being on the defensive and slamming my fists on the table, I've decided my style. And it's probably generational. I don't know. I don't know if millennials take the same tack. But mine is actually to project a sense of compassion and to project a sense of that I want the respect for my brain, of what I articulate, how I present myself. And not in a defensive way, but that clearly changes the dialogue, that by the end of the conversation, they're feeling that that was an a-hole move in the early part of the conversation, and then there is a natural respect. And that's sort of the role modeling I try and play, especially because I deal with so many men all the time, that I present it in a way that surprises them that this was not what they expected the conversation to be. And I think the more that we can, through compassion, role model ways in which we can, Goldie and I should just keep doing this thing. She keeps saying something and I just build on it. I so much agree with that, which is, how do you collaborate to do something greater together? And the only way to do that is to deal with those biases in a way that's respectful. And certainly with clear disrespect, I've gotten that at times. I will then very much speak up and speak my mind. But in instances where there really truly is unconscious bias, what is my role as a female leader, given that there's such a single-digit percentage of public company CEOs and minorities? I don't want to be a statistic to the guy across the table.
Perfect.
Jane, you have seen so many women's movements. How is this one different? What is the upshot and what is the potential danger?
Well, I think the difference is the speed with which it's grown and the number of people that actually is, social media is partly responsible for that, because you can reach out to people. Before it had to be letters or telephones or something, and now you can do a mass thing, and people feel emboldened when there's large numbers of people. But that's what happens in demonstrations, for example. But I've lived longer than anybody up on this platform. And I wanted the change that I've seen in my lifetime. I was really lucky because I lived with a household of very strong women. Many of them going out. My grandmother, for example, she was one of the very first women in England to actually get a job. She went and learned how to do physical training. And her daughter became a physiotherapist in Guy's Hospital. So strong women. And my mother, my role model, telling me I could do anything I wanted to do. There was no indication in my family that because I was a girl, there was something I couldn't do, and it was the same for my sister. So then when I sort of came into contact with the real world, I was, first of all, lucky in that I was in Africa, and there, being a woman was very helpful to me. Louis Leakey felt women were more patient and made better field observers. He wanted women to go and do his studies of apes. And that was just after independence in Tanzania. And the white male was a little bit threatening to the newly independent African men. So, but me, I was a female, and they could nurture me. So, I was lucky. But coming into Cambridge, where the professors were mostly men at that time, that was 1962. And gradually over the years, I've seen more and more and more women moving into high places, moving into government, and being fascinated. In Africa, for example, women are certainly kept down, but in the household, very often, the woman is in total control. And we all know the saying, hen-pecked husband. And have you not all met hen-pecked husbands in homes? Because I certainly have met many. And I love I can't remember which Latin American tribe it was, but one of their shaman stood up to speak at a conference. It was State of the World conference. And he said, in my tribe, we think of ourselves as an eagle. One wing is male, the other wing is female. And only when the two wings are equal will we fly true.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
That's
like
the
that.
eagle. That's the United States of America.
It's on the quarter.
That was beautiful.
Oh,
Do you
that's
think
fabulous.
men are looking for different things when finding meaning? Or are they looking for the same things that women are?
I would think they're mostly looking for the same things, meaning in their lives, making some use of your life. I mean, isn't that the thing? To
I
have
think
a
men
useful
want to
life.
be adored.
So do men.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
I think I'm being funny because I can't be serious for too long. But I do know it's important to men to feel adored, and it's a very, very interesting dynamic, when they don't feel that way, and that's not all men. But it is interesting. What was your question about what men?
Are men looking for the same kinds of things when they're looking for meaning? Does meaning mean the same thing to men that it does to women?
It's different. I think they're very goal-oriented. They think differently than we do. I mean, we are our area of empathy, I think, in many ways is quite different. And meaning can be connected to an empathetic reaction to the world, to your children, to your family. Men fix things. We want to just talk. And it's kind of like, I didn't need you to fix this. I need you to hear me. It doesn't matter. That's how we solve and we feel better. But women need each other. So, women together live longer, actually, because we have this great community. I mean, I've just met you, and I feel like I've known you for all my life, because we're so aligned, and it makes my heart happy. And we also have that with men also, but it's a little harder, because oftentimes there's a friction between male-female relationships because of sexuality. So it's complicated.
It is
Nancy Myers
complicated.
said maybe like that.
It is
No,
complicated.
If I were to answer that question, I
Yeah.
do think the expectation on the journey in life may be different, and it'll vary. But I have heard that if we ask an elderly gentleman what is the biggest regret in his life in surveys, it's often a commentary that there wasn't enough time spent with family. And so, in a sense, the journey may have been different, but I think that humanness in all of us, of this sense of love and empathy and belonging, and I think both personally, but I also think, as you pointed out, with meditation and developing your brain, one of the things I've learned, and I'm still young and so much to learn, Jane, around, life, but I've come to the realization that in this journey, that self-reflection of humanness, the more that you can focus on that, the more open and outwardly you can be to give more to other people. And I think whatever gender we are, men or women, that I think that investment in ourselves, and I know it sounds narcissistic and it sounds a little deep, but honestly, meditation gives you that gift of that comfort in yourself so that you can then just focus on others.
It really is. It's an interesting thing, because there is chemical change in the brain. Men lose their testosterone at a certain time. So they're, also the aspect of all of our hormones, and our endocrine system changes. So there's a noticeable difference between men who are driven with the testosterone running through their blood. We don't have that. We don't know what that feels like. And that has to be, in many ways, quite a burden, because there is this fighting this urge, right? That is just, it's all about the pituitary gland and what's happening inside. As men get older, they soften.
Interesting.
And become much more connected to the family, to their grandchildren, and more reflective about how they look at their life now. And it's really interesting, my experience in belonging, which I don't like clubs and all this, but I love to play golf, so we have a place in Palm Desert. Kurt did say to me when I took him there, "I know you're taking me here to die, I know." But anyway, driving there, and everyone's elderly, but the greatest conversations I've had have been with men who are sort of long past the period of where they're achieving, where they're the it guy, and it's quite interesting, this sort of transformation that happens. And women, oddly enough, become more productive.
Can I just ask her a question, though? So what do we do about our sons?
That's really interesting. That's a really interesting question.
I have 3, so I want to know.
Yeah, I have 3 too. You have 1? Yeah.
I have 2.
And you have 2? Yeah, it is something that, honestly, the only way to get around it, even though they're just crazy, especially when they're young like this, is to actually talk to them. And I think that, in my feeling is that my boys really shared just about everything. And that is one thing I said to my youngest. I said, "Honey, you can tell me anything. I will never judge you, and I will never say anything back to you. I will never play it back. But you need to have someone who loves you to talk to about some things that worry you, that bother you, that and it has been so powerful, because it's like my son said to me, I just told my friend, he said to me on the phone the other day, that my mom really understands what we're talking about. I think that kind of connection with your son is important, that we give them the opportunity to be boys and to celebrate that and to understand all the extenuating circumstances and be there, because the reality is this: the first person your son will fall in love with is you. It is the mother. And when they try to do fun things and turn you and pick you and do silly things with you, we have to remember as women how to be, not to go, oh, don't, oh, this, but just to show that they make you laugh and that you're receptive and that you're a friend and you're fun to play with. Because we're modeling who they're going to be with. And I mean, I'm telling you, it makes such a huge difference. And the same with the girls, with the dads, because they model also. And that's who we look for. So if we get a disengaged father, we're going to be looking for a disengaged husband. And then that's going to cause problems. So that whole relational thing, I think we have to know when they're getting their buildup of hormones. I said to my grandson the other day, okay, I know you're a teenager now, but let's not do teenage now, okay? We're going to bed.
Did that work?
It did, because we got it, right? You're crazy teenage, I totally get it, I can deal with it, but we're going to bed now, right? And we laughed, but it's a recognition, isn't it?
We're all here, I think, to find meaning from you and hear a lesson. And, you know, I know regret is a powerful thing. It's so easy to say you have no regrets, but I'm curious, as you look back on your lives and your careers, which are certainly still going, if there's ever been a risk you wish you took that you didn't take, or, you know, a turn you made that you did not, and what the lesson might be in there for all of us. Jane?
Well, I mean, when I look back over my life, of course I made mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes. We actually learn from those mistakes, or we should do. But is there anything I really regret, any risk I wish I'd taken? No, I don't think so. I think, quite honestly, that every challenge that came up, I didn't turn aside from any of them. And so it's okay.
Thank you.
I want to add one thing about this male-female difference. You know, yes, our biology is different, our brains are different, but there's also something else to take into consideration. One is upbringing, and until very recently, boys were supposed to be boys and girls were supposed to be girls. That was the way it was. Girls had little girly toys and little girly clothes, and boys had little boy things and were supposed to be tomboys and weren't allowed to cry. I'm talking about England now. And then if you go around the world and you see the different cultures, the culture into which you're born can have an enormous effect on developing your character. And if we go back even before that, to the early childhood, to me, one of the most important things is that that child has, doesn't have to be a biological mother, but it has to be up to 3 adults that that child can truly trust and speak to. And that we find with the chimpanzees as well, a huge difference in mothers who are caring and supportive and mothers who are less so. And so, you know, we are a mixture of biology and of culture and of upbringing. We're a real mixed lot. But certainly recently, in many places I've been, men are taking more and more and more of a caregiving role of their families. And it's lovely to watch, actually, how men, you know, are taking leave now, you know, baby leave, maternity leave, to help look after babies. So we're changing, and we're moving in the right direction. And this movement, you asked about could anything go wrong? The only thing that could go wrong is the pendulum swings too far. And that would be so sad, because if it swings too far, we'll be back, only this wing will be up and that wing will be down. It used to be this way, and we want them the same.
I love that. Mistakes?
Mistakes or something you wish you had done differently?
I've thought a lot about that. No. No. Every mistake that one would say, well, I made, was a learning. It was not a mistake. And if we don't make mistakes, we don't learn. It's what's wrong now today. You want to let your kids go and not helicopter them. Let them make mistakes. It's how you build resilience. So, how could I say I made mistakes when in fact some of those mistakes were the greatest gifts of my life? So, no.
Awesome.
I would answer no as well. And so much of it is focused around learning. But I think so much of it is this sense, and especially in leadership, some of you might relate to this, of what I call opposing forces. There's this sense of when you meet somebody who's very authentic, and you can feel it, there's a natural confidence. They look you in the eye, but they're also very human and vulnerable. And you kind of wonder, especially if you're raising children, how do you teach your children to be both? How do you, as leaders, because I'm constantly thinking about how I mentor and groom people, how is it that you want to build this sense of self and inner confidence and the power that they have to look at somebody in the eye and inspire a person and be so charismatic, but yet be so human and approachable and touchable in a way? That, to me, is the journey. And that's difficult. How do you balance those two things in life? And so much of it, as Goldie and Jane pointed out, is that if, in fact, you embrace a lot of those failures, you're open about those things, and just say, this is just a freaking journey, and it's hard. It's just that hard. And it's certainly conversations I have with my boys. And so this natural set of opposing forces is something we should just embrace. And in a weird way, that vulnerability builds overall confidence in life that then results in overall meaning, which was what we were discussing today. So that's, I know it sounds a little deep, but it's something I think a lot about in this journey.
Well, you've all said so many things that they're so quotable. I want to write them down. I just got a book of amazing quotes from women, and I opened it up, and Jane's was the first. We want to send people out of the room like this. And so I would love it if each of you, and we have 2 minutes left, so 30 seconds each, what's one thing that people in this room can do to push for equality? And I think equality is not just the right thing. I think it's a smart thing in so many ways. What's one thing that people in this room can do to build a more equal world and make more women like you possible?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
That every human you interact with, you go to this conference, and I have this rule. I can just meet 2 people, but if they are deep, meaningful conversations, and it's whether it's wait staff, it's the production team, it's the attendees, that is what gives me meaning. True human interaction.
I would say eliminate fear. When you realize that you have no fear, you can accomplish anything. So I would say that would be my imparting idea.
I think my parting comment would be that, is this going funny? It's all right.
Oh God,
I can hear you loud and clear.
Is that it's to tell people that they matter, to tell people that every day they make an impact on the world, to show equal respect to men and women, young and old, people with different colored skin, different culture, different clothes, different religion. Respect them, listen to them, and give them hope that we're going to move towards a better world.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much.